WC11. So this is starting now, so the music will not appear in the recording. And also we wanted to exchange, see also the reaction. It's a bit the problem with this online event, where at the end you just see black screens and no one in the room. So at least you can put your camera on, don't be shy. It's also nice to see people's face from time to time. So these are the main reasons why we change. We can also do polls, and we expect also more interaction and engagement from you. That's a bit the limitation also when we are using the other platform. But without further ado, just a brief word of introduction and we jump in. We did this Skills for Science session to talk about the Science 2.0 or the Scientist 2.0. I had the personal experience that all these congresses were only focusing on pure expertise, knowledge production, knowledge management, but there were a whole world around the work as a scientist that was not covered or not discussed during those events. And it's not true only for alternative to animal testing and laboratory animals, or life science, but I think science in general. So we wanted to give you a bit of an idea about the tip of the iceberg, what is needed for young scientists when they want to engage their research career. It's not only about grant writing, paper writing, or book writing. There is a lot more of things that they need to master or at least be aware of. That's it for me for the introduction. I will have my dear Nuno also as a co-chair. He will be the one reading the bios and making sure we are on time. So we have also enough opportunity to chat all together. And I will start with my presentation.
So if you're going to start with your presentation, I think it's my turn to introduce you.
Yes.
So it is my pleasure to introduce François Busquet from Altertox. And François is a French toxicologist with a doctoral degree in life sciences obtained in 2008 and a master's degree of sciences in biotechnology. Since 2012, he founded Altertox to advocate for the 3 R's to the members of the European Parliament and expanded Altertox activities to education and training, consulting, communication, and dissemination of scientific results to targeted audience, in particular policymakers, peers, and the general public. So without any further ado, the floor is yours, François. Take it away.
Thank you, thank you. So yes, it's me, and we will talk first about the smart use of social media in 3 R's. Social media is, as you know, in our field, at best considered as a hobby, at worst as a waste of time. Let me show you that there is some value around it. I had to double check again the names of the ladies. That is the first one. I knew Giselle, but I could not remember her last name, but it's Bunchen. It's the ex-girlfriend of DiCaprio, as much as I remember. And she has something quite interesting. She was using social media to advocate a specific policy issue. Her influence on Twitter was used to abolish a decree that would have reduced the protected area. Angelina Jolie was doing the same some years ago, speaking about gene detection followed with surgery. And we have also maybe a negative example with Kim Kardashian, who was misleading information about morning sickness. All these things happened on Twitter. All these things were based on facts or fake news. The funny thing is that this genomist Neil Heil, who started to develop the K index from the name of Kardashian index, and Science Mag picked this up as first maybe it was a prank or a joke, but they decided to calculate the K index for the most famous scientists on Twitter. So I explain you how K-index is calculated. Just a second, I am putting the pointer. So you use the number of Twitter followers divided by the number of citation, and you get your K-index. Okay. So a high K-index indicates an overblown scientific fame. A low K-index suggests that the scientist is being undervalued, and a K-index around 5 can be considered as a science Kardashian. I didn't really warn my colleagues and speakers, but I calculated their K-index. So none of us is a science Kardashian, I have to say. So none of us is above 5. Some of us are undervalued, I think all of us. And I think it's Nuno, you are the closest to a star with a K-index of 3. So well done, Nuno. You can all double check your own K-index if you are on Twitter, maybe using this small calculation. Well, besides this, what was interesting here, there were three key messages. First of all, there was almost no women in this most followed scientist, and there is a reason why. The female scientists are also most likely to face sexist attacks online that can discourage their participation. At some point, you just get fed up with all the why you are ugly or why you are hot comments. So there is also an issue on the presence of female scientists on social media. One of the reasons also to use Twitter is for some of the people to rely on an army of web crawlers to bring you the latest, most noteworthy research in medical science. So like any tool, it can be used for crap or it can be used for good. So you need also to be, you need maybe to follow the right Twitter account so you collect the information and you raise awareness on your own topic. This was from 2017. Top Chinese university to consider social media posts in researcher evaluation. We could have made also during the Skills for Science session all presentation, what is good science? How do you measure the impact of a researcher? Is it just the number of scientific publications, the number of books he or she writes, the number of collaboration, the grants, etc., etc. So they were the first one to put this up. You have, and you should maybe link, and you have more and more official tools to measure those metrics. It's altmetrics and Plum Analytics. Some of these are free, some of these are not, and can be also used for your own metrics when it comes to social media. They collect all the information on the web based on your paper, blogs, Twitter, reshare, etc. Recently, we had the Dutch university that are abandoning impact factor in hiring and promoting decisions. So these are things that you need to consider also in the global system of your scientific career. Just a quick overlook on scientists and the social network. Although it was from 2014, I think it's still worth presenting you those results. And I will stop sharing since I want to make the first poll. So you will be able, and I have 3 questions for you guys. So the first one, which social media are you using the most professionally? So it would be nice to vote. So far I have 0. Voilà, thank you. First votes are coming. Which social media are you using the most personally? And how often do you use social network? All right, and half of the people have voted. The speakers can also vote if they want. And I will stop and share the results. So professionally, it's LinkedIn. Okay, that's some of you are using Twitter or even Instagram. That's interesting. It would be good to know why. We can come back to this later on. Mostly personally, Instagram, most of you, Facebook, most of you, and sometimes Twitter. How often do you use social network? Rarely, or most of you, it's multiple times, or once a day or multiple times a day. Thank you. So let's go back now to the presentation. So this was done in 2014. What the Nature survey indicates that, let me put back the pointer, that for Twitter in general, they use it for discussion, for research, for content. That's the blue. Yellow is for the metrics and professional or discover jobs. So you see it's also used for these activity, and the green is do not use professionally. So LinkedIn do not use professionally, but that was 2014. Our quick poll shows us it's now different, but it's still used very much for the jobs. Nevertheless, Facebook is still used for personal reason. That seems quite clear. You can look at some of the comments. Twitter is extremely useful in conference settings. That's true. We use it a lot in those opportunities. Here we have mainly useful for job hunting. I like this guy who say Facebook has zero credibility in my professional life. And we have exactly just below the opposite with an astronomer saying that they have vibrant discussion on this fora. So as usual, depends on the people, depends on how you use the tool. There is no just one rule fit all. Nevertheless, there are some consideration you can have. LinkedIn are used in general to contact other professional, Twitter to follow discussion, and Facebook for non-professional purpose. But the good things about Facebook is that you know that when the people are on Facebook, and it's called marketing and geolocalization, you can send them advertisement. So there is also market tracking, and all these tools can be used also even for you scientists to find your interest or to show you other interests. But that was more an aparté. Let me continue. Here I will not, this is a poster I did at the last World Congress on Twitter. Again, I'm a big fan of Twitter because Twitter is also open source. I had collected more than 500,000 tweets on specific hashtag, animal testing, animal-free testing, animal-free tests, top animal testing, just to see what was coming up. The number of tweets, when. You can also do sentiment analysis if people agree, disagree with the topic. There are particularly interesting things you can look at, and by writing simple lines of codes. So it's also really useful in terms of monitoring. But to give you an idea, 500,000 tweets over 3 years is very limited. You have 500 million of tweets every day. So that's not also the hot topic on Twitter. Nevertheless, these are things you can do. I also made a publication around this. The DOI is here regarding this work. Still regarding social media and also conference, there was the BioTwip, which was a Twitter conference made by some guys where you had to present your work only with tweets. Yeah, so minimum character that force you also to build specific message and go really to the minimum of what you wanted your audience to learn. I had the chance just before the COVID to go to this Woodstock Bio. It was in Tel Aviv, and it was one of my best conferences. No offense to World Congress, guys, you can still improve. But it was Oded Reshavi, professor in biology in an institute in Israel, who said, I'd like to organize a conference of all the scientists I like on Twitter. And I signed up. And we were in Tel Aviv, 300 people, tweeting all the time, making a 5-minute presentation about our work. We had even have to choose a song to enter on the stage, and you even didn't know when you were talking. So in that way, you were always forced to listen, because all the time, sometimes we tend, I tend actually not to be very concentrated if I know that I will give a presentation, or I will just tweak my slides until the last minute. Nevertheless, that was a great experience. I don't know if they will continue, but it brings back the fun in science the way I want to see it more often when we are doing exchanging knowledge during conference setup, which is normally the equation is if you want to be credible, you have to be boring. And this is sometimes not always true. You can also be credible and have fun at the same time. We have to bring this back. And that's two things normally we tend to opposite. Well, if you don't like social media, there are also plenty of ways where you can communicate, because at the end of the day, this talk is about science communication. So it is this guy is doing a cappella science. Go on YouTube, follow his account. Some of you may know or may not know him. He has done a good covers on many different topics. I really invite you to look at him. Some of these are maybe more known for you. The Dance Your PhD contest from AAAS. You have Science in the Pub or Pint of Science, and you have my thesis in 180 seconds that is now becoming a bit more, I would say, standard. Maybe I have forgotten something. Feel free to put it in the chat for the others also to know what is going on. So why we do science communication? For the fun? Yes, but it's also, there is a purpose behind. And that's why I wanted to put it at the end of my presentation. We had good fun with the K-index, but science needs a voice. And you need to practice your voice. You need to practice also your message. You need to be able to engage with the society. We have a very central role in the community or in the society as it is. And as you have noticed with COVID, but in general, we can be put directly on the stage to give an expertise. And we need to be prepared for that. Using science communication, using also those different mediums, prepare us to be efficient and be listened to. Because if you're upset about all the fake news, etc., maybe yourself you can contribute. Maybe yourself you can be part of the solution also. There are many places to do that. You have the March for Science that was in the US some years ago, complaining about climate change and others. You have the International Network for Government for Science Advice, which is a structure where all scientists that are talking to policymakers, prime ministers, depending on the setup of the government, have direct access to. You have the Global Young Academy, which is more for young scientists, where you have a curriculum and you discover the whole different skill set that we will see today. And that will be all for my conclusion. So Twitter or any other communication media are a good exercise for crafting your key messages, practice skill communication, engage with stakeholders, be visible, be transparent. I know that we are always scared to say something stupid. You think the others are. And you will also learn more about the stakeholders and you will capture a different point of view. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed.
Okay, you kept to the time. Brilliant. So we will save questions for the very end. So if you have questions for any other speakers, do save it to the end. I will now pass the presentation to Nynke Kramer, who will talk on data management in a changing toxicity testing paradigm. So Dr. Nynke is Associate Professor at Wageningen University and Research. As it says on his bio, starting as of today. So yesterday, she was still an Assistant Professor in Toxicology at Utrecht University. and has tapped into the university's resources and expertise in data management plans, useful for young scientists everywhere. So Nynke, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. So yes, on this slide, as you can see, I'm still, it says I'm still part of Utrecht University. And in fact, behind me, it is Utrecht University. Although today was my first day at Wageningen University, but the internet crashed on the whole campus. So I went back and I'm sitting in my old office, having said goodbye yesterday. So the irony, just a side note, but what I'm going to talk about is not internet connection, although that could be related. But I'm going to talk about data management in a toxicity testing paradigm, in a changing toxicity testing paradigm. It's really meant for early stage researchers that are not familiar yet and have not devised such a data management plan. It's really to tease you as to why you would consider something like this, and particularly in this field of toxicity testing with 3 Rs or new approach methodologies. If this is an introduction, so there's a lot more data and there's a lot more information, so please feel free to email me afterwards with your specific questions if you don't have time to ask them in this session. So let me just continue here. So like I've said, I'm just going to discuss the why and the how of data management plans for those that are unfamiliar with it. So I'm assuming here that Mr. Bean was too, but I actually don't know. Maybe he's an expert. But this is a little poll that I'm just curious to know to what extent you've ever considered writing a data management plan and why you would do that. Could I have a poll?
You have it, and people are voting now. You see it, Nynke?
I see the poll submitted, I could, but I can't actually answer it. Can you give me the results?
Yes, slowly. Half of the people have voted. 60%. Come on, guys. Okay, and I'll close the poll. Here are the results.
Yes, so
it's obligatory. So
yes, and then to be honest, that's also the whole reason I got in there in the first place. So a couple years ago, admittedly, I was all of a sudden from the funding agencies. A lot of them are starting to require it. But what I want to argue here that it's not just for them that you would do it, it's actually for yourself. It can be, I wouldn't say maybe it's fun, although a couple of you actually did mention it, but it's incredibly important. And when you do think about it, it will be fun later on, because having a good data management plan at the start, it will make it easier for you to do this at the end. So I have to get back to my slides. So what is a data management plan? So for those who don't know, these are plans explaining, as the name already tells you, explaining how you handle your research data, right? So your research data, not just during your PhD, for example, but also after the project. So what happens to the data afterwards? So then you just have a plan there. And so it encompasses not just you creating your data and writing it down somewhere, but it also encompasses a plan of how you plan to share your data or how you plan to preserve it. So the important aspect here is the longevity of your data. And to most of us, data would be something like a concentration response relationship, but it's much more than that. So it's not just your spreadsheets with your data, but includes your recordings. And in my case, where I do a lot of modeling, that actually includes the scripts, the algorithms that I use, the software that I used, and its longevity. So that's all encompassed in the term data. And lastly, but very important, these plans are a living document. So you adjust them along the way, right? Not just when you start and you hand in your grant and you have to hand in that plan as well. No, but you actually adjust it along the way. And what I'm going to argue next is really like why is it important to you, other than having to do this for your funding agency or who mandates it. So it really makes your research data more reproducible and actually allows you to get your information out and have more impact with the data that you create. So this is a figure that has come from our data management center that we have here at Utrecht University. And they made a nice little image here, but I really like what they say. So it really increases your data impact, like I've mentioned here, and importantly, and I can really vouch for that myself, it makes your research more efficient because you've planned what to do with the data, and particularly when you reuse them, because most of us will reuse and then we can easily find it. And it complies very importantly also here to the FAIR principles. I'm not sure to what extent you're familiar with the FAIR principle, but it's a rather important aspect here. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, right? So with these are principles that were written in 2006 on the scientific data management and stewardship in scientific data. It was intended to provide guidelines to improve the findability and the accessibility, interoperability, and reuse of these digital data sets. And the first step is making your data findable. And this is really encompasses assigning a global, a unique and persistent identifier to your data. And so once you've made these findable, you should consider how people who look for your data, who found your data, how they can access it. So think here about the authentication and authorization of it. And very importantly, the data usually needs to be integrated with other data, and particularly when I do this myself, and when we use modeling data, I have different data from different sources that I need to put into a single model. And so it needs to be interoperable, at least have a workflow of the analysis of storage and processing. And then lastly, and that's very important, of course, is the ultimate goal here is to optimize the reuse of the data so that it can be replicated and combined in a different setting long after you've finished your research. So this is me traditionally, and unfortunately I'm not the only one, because I could find this a lot of these fun cartoons on there. So, so most of us would make we do our experiments, and the data, I would store the data myself, and the only other person knowing of that data would be my supervisor. We would publish it, and you would hope that if someone ever wants to use your data, that the researcher themselves could find it quickly. And I can vouch for this myself here. So this is the very first paper I ever wrote. This already tells you how old I am, old enough here to know better. So I here had my very first paper concerned solid phase micro extraction, and I looked at and I explained how albumin binding would actually increase the time, the diffusion, or decrease the diffusion time across two different phases. And this then years later, after I'd finished my PhD, someone, a Pfizer scientist, asked me for this data, for the raw data, so that he could use it in his model. And it was only fortunate that I was actually still at Utrecht University, and my boss, who had by that time retired, but I spent an entire day just looking for that data, because it was such a long time ago, and all he needed is the raw data here. But it was in my little lab journal, which had stacked up by this time. And I could have probably rewritten the entire model for him in the same time that I took just to find that data. So things have to change, and admittedly, things have to change. And I'm not the first to actually say that to say this. In fact, in 1994, that's way before I started, this paper had come out, and they already say very explicitly the importance of data management for toxicological studies. So the paper actually states the process to process the enormous amount of data a multitude of times with the use of what they say computerized systems would be advantageous. Well, and this author talks about megabytes of data as being enormous. We all know that that's definitely not the case. This is a more recent paper. The two papers in toxicology that really specifically look at data management. And this is a more recent paper, and the prefix in front of bytes has changed by now in predictive toxicology. In the study, they indicate that there actually still a gap still remains in the development of data governance framework to support predictive toxicology here, right? And they also, but that's quite neat, they highlight the accessible toxicity data repositories, such as ToxCast that you might be familiar with, and ChemSpider databases. Now, here is toxicity testing in the 21st century, which most of us are at this conference because we are in some way related, at least, to the use of new approach methodologies for sciences in general, and a lot of us are toxicologists too. We no longer look at, an oral dose and relate that to an effect concentration on the animal or a population. We're actually interested in predicting and understanding the mechanism that leads up to this effect here, and we're collating data from lots of different sources. We've got our in vitro systems, which form the basis of it, and there we observe lots of different biomarkers to understand the interaction at the molecular target, the cellular dysfunction that occurs then up to the point where it reaches an organ and a type of toxicity. And so I've listed here the different sources of data that come in toxicity testing that you would consider. So, in vitro toxicology, we've got not just our little 6-well or 12-well plate, we've got high throughput systems where we're generating data at like a magnitude of the speed that we would be in the early 2000s. And of course, with the advent of omics, this data has significantly increased. Now we still have our in vivo toxicity data too, but which are very different form than most of the in vitro toxicity data is. And many of us will be dealing with epidemiological data. And what's very specific here is that these are personal data, and you have to really consider the associated security and privacy issues that are accompanying there. Then, of course, you've got computational toxicology, which is more my area, but here we're generating algorithms, quantitative structure activity relationships, PBPK models, and all these are data too, right? So I can mention the equations themselves are. And with the advent of artificial intelligence, that brings an added an added complexity to what we consider data and how we should consider it reproducible and findable, etc., because it's the machine learning itself.
Please be mindful of time, Nynke, sorry.
Yep, I'll be very quick, don't worry. And so then you've got your adverse outcome pathway, which really combines it all. And just to put a picture here, so you've got your virtual human platform that we've started here. And this is just to illustrate that most of our projects, a lot of the EU projects that we have in this field are actually very much the data generation and collation is actually central in these projects. And therefore you actually have entire work packages and entire companies just working on the data management here, for example, for SURAT1 in the Tox Bank. Data you can consider in a life cycle. I've put them up here. So it's not just creating data, but you're processing, analyzing it, and preserving and giving it access to it, and reusing it. And there's a lot of advantages to actually doing it and publishing from raw data all the way up to the analyzed data. It gets your results and your work recognized. And what's also really important when you're looking at for what data should I be reporting and considering, also consider the guidance documents on good in vitro method practices, as well as guidance documents on good modeling practices. And it will actually list the things that you have to do. I like this from the University of Zurich, which it tells you exactly what should be addressed. So what kind of data are you generating, how are the ethical issues handled, how are the data stored, and how are they accessible and for the future. A lot of your departments at the university, if you're doing a PhD, for example, will actually have entire departments associated or resources associated for data management, and can really help you there. And there are a number of courses, for example, at my university here at Wageningen, they will actually have courses to do this. And I would really advise you to consider this. Last, if you don't want to do, there are actually a lot of resources too that you can actually use to actually make your data management plan. So for example, DMP Online is what we generally use at university. So that brings me to the last slide here, and that's conclusion. So the conclusions of the slide really depend on you. So will you go home now and write a data management plan?
Half of the people have voted. Okay, 1 or 2 more seconds. The other one are sleeping or multitasking. Okay, and that's what you got.
So still 30% I haven't convinced yet.
You'll need another session.
Absolutely, it's a whole field.
I see that.
So then, thank you, and questions for later.
Okay, thank you, Nynke. Next up is Marco Straccia, who with his talk on From Research to Innovation, Business and the Life Sciences. So Dr. Straccia works to improve human health by helping scientists bring their solutions from the bench to the society. He founded Fresci and is CEO of Science and Strategy. He's a former associate professor in stem cell technology and regenerative medicine at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at University of Barcelona, holds a PhD in neuroscience and an MBA, which is interesting, a Master in International Health and Tropical Medicine, and a BSc in biology. That's impressive. He has been a researcher in basic and applied biomedicine, working on different experimental paradigms, in vivo and in vitro in the field of neuroscience and stem cell biology. And he has also developed advanced models for high throughput drug discovery, safety testing, and disease modeling. That got me exhausted. Marco, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuno, for the kind presentation. Can you see my screen? Yes. Yes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you see the right one, not the one with the notes? So good evening, everyone. I'm very happy that François organized this nice session. So it's very interesting to start a new session of this Congress with some music, 80 music. So thank you. So exactly 19 years ago, I put my first step in a biomed lab in the research with the idea that, I started biomed research because I would like to change, improve patients' life. And that was the main idea. But I mean, I would say that after a couple of years, I got stuck in a very clear cycle that most of you most likely knows, which is that you are stuck in the bench, do your results, performing your experiments, analyze the data, writing a data management plan, as Nynke was suggesting. I was not doing it at that time. And I was, of course, there was no Twitter. So anything I was doing is doing experiments, reading papers, and hopefully write my results in a paper. What I was doing when I was, writing the results, and especially at that moment, I was starting having new idea. So just have time to have a beer, a kind of celebration with all the other people. But the next morning was exactly the same thing. I was getting another idea for another experiment. I was starting again my research. And of course I was on the bench, So mostly the idea coming from the party was alcohol derived, but it's still working and I could have some fun before. But the thing is this really what the research is aiming for? Well, at least the biomedical research, because I mean, as you know, the research can actually provide knowledge, but should also deliver something, an impact, what is the society, or at least a couple of patients, if you're lucky. So, and probably when you start in the cycle, what I experienced was that after 3 years, I got my PhD, I started my PhD in London, and I quit. Okay, I completely quit because I wouldn't do this cycle again. And actually, the Royal Society in 2010 published a study where they actually showed that 80% of the researchers are exiting the academic career, okay, in one stage or in another. There are very few that are coming back, but I mean, at the very early stage, you have 53% that are leaving, and then still 47 that they are still not convinced, so they start their PhD, their master. Some of them, 17%, can find a place in non-university research. 30% still keep, doing a postdoc, and they're going maybe or leaving the postdoc sometime after. And just 0.45 can have a stable position, or 3.5% permanent staff research. This is, of course, 11 years old, but I believe this is not far away of what is right now, especially because we have even less academic position, and I would say even less funding. So this is a very hard thing, and we all think that research is kind of innovation. But actually, what is innovation? So research is not innovation. In the research is just a piece of the puzzle of the innovation of the process. Okay, so just to make you understand what innovation is, just think about this guy. Maybe you know him. This is Fleming, and I believe that you know that Fleming discovered the penicillin. But actually, this guy just discovered the penicillin. So it was just like me, just like any experiment during the research progress. What he was doing is, okay, I come back from my vacation, because that's actually the story that we have. I found some mold on the Petri dishes, and he said, oh, come on, this is something that is killing my bacteria. So maybe it's interesting. And he found out that the penicillin was killing the bacteria. But it was not actually the one that then, biochemically isolated penicillin. So there were other two researchers that were very important in this process. But this was still in the early 1928. And we didn't use the penicillin thing for I would say, almost 20 years later. And why we use the penicillin 20 years later? But actually, even the industry in UK didn't have the interest to isolate the penicillin. Okay. Now it's blocked. Okay, now it's working. So when the penicillin, they start looking what was interesting for, which was, of course, killing the bacteria, but of course, preventing infection. The people from UK, the industry, were not ready, and they didn't have any money to do that. So they went back to the US and say, okay, let's start to some people here that they can make it change the things. So from a very research lab, the penicillin got in the hands of the industry. But also the industry was saying, okay, why we have to produce this? So then the government got say, okay, maybe this can be interested, because we have some problem in Europe, which is called Nazi and the Second World War. So then the government and the war started. We have a lot of interest from the American government. And what happened was that from just having penicillin 20 years later, and know the properties, we start producing penicillin. And in 1945, almost 7.5 trillion units were produced. And this probably is the game changer that the Americans and all the allies from the Second World War actually gain the war. So why they win? Because of course they can prevent infection. So they got more soldiers there, and this was not still in the hands of of the Germans or Italians. So as you see, some discovery in the research lab doesn't need only a researcher to get a really impact in the society and really change the things. We have seen this, of course, right now with the COVID. We had plenty of research. We have plenty of things that were coming over. We accumulate that knowledge, and that knowledge is the piece of the puzzle. But then you need a lot of money. Then you need pharma industry. Then you need the willing of the government. And of course, then you need a lot of communication. Okay, communication about why we are doing a vaccine. Probably is not still working because we have a lot of no-vax around there. But that's something that also was related to what François was saying. We need to communicate our science. We need to communicate, because the technology that we need to do the vaccine, we were already using 10 years ago in the lab, and even 20 years ago in the lab, okay, to transfect our cells. So that's what probably needs, so as you see, you need many people to really create innovation, not just researcher. But you still need people that know science to do this process. And maybe, I mean, one interesting thing is that, of course, what is this process? Is that maybe you can jump from one place to the other, okay? And this probably broadened your view and broadened your capacity, or boost your capacity to deliver your results into the society. So maybe when you start jumping from one position to another outside and inside the academia, which is now called gig economy, okay, maybe if you are experimenting the gig economy will help you, okay? Because another trend, which I completely hate, because business doesn't make, right now you heard that a lot of these 80% people are doing anything that is not science, or some of them are starting startups or spin-offs. But also this is a kind of fight between many people, and it's just fighting for the small money the industry is giving you to starting a startup. But startup is still not innovation. A lot of people think that they can get rich. Of course you can, but these are just very small few people that can do that. So the startup is also a fight between peers, which is another way that the academia has to kick you off the academic place that they do not have. At least for Nynke, they had one, so congratulations for her. But most of the people is trying to, give you, just try to build your startup or your spin-off. We can give you, 10,000 euros, and just go there. Just go there and start your adventure. Put a tie, a suits, and do your startup. But a startup journey is also something that shouldn't be something very, very light, because the startup world, it's a very long trip. You need a lot of skills. They are not just knowing the science and that's it. And also, just to give you another pessimistic view about the startups, if these are the startups, these square represent old startups that are coming out from academia. After just 5 years, you have these small square that are still surviving. And after 10 years, that's the square of company that are still right there. And after these 10 years, maybe you do not see the point, because it's just a one pixel is the successful one, okay? So also you have to think that the research and the innovation is just not that you create a startup with your results in the bench, but it's really logic and pragmatic process that you have to take, and you still need other people to help you to do that. And that's mostly what is called open innovation, which is the big industry telling you, I don't want to spend my money in R&D, so please do my job, make your new solution, and then I will acquire you if you are successful. But maybe you have spent all the money of your family or your savings, and maybe also the credit that you take to the bank. So that's the reality. So how you can improve really the innovation process? I didn't make this example. This is coming from Professor David Demartin. This is the human knowledge. And when you start in elementary school, you start having some, more of this knowledge. With the high school, of course, you increase. With the bachelor school, still increasing, and you start having some specialization in one part. Then with a master, of course, you are going to increase the specialization. And when you start your PhD student, when you're a PhD student, you start, or you should start, to study all the state of the art, And then when you start, you focus and do your experiments, and that will start up. You start pushing the knowledge. And in the very end, if you're successful, when you get your PhD, you have created and enlarged the new knowledge, But what happened? That this now is your reality. And your reality, most of the time, you just share your reality with your peers, which is your tribe. And your tribe is just a tribe thinking and thinking the same way that you are thinking. So you start having a perception bias. So you maybe start thinking that you and your tribe are still a very small point in the human knowledge. That you do not know nothing, or at least you know very specific ones, and there are many other tribes and many other people right there. So what you have to do is start connecting with the other people, with the other discipline, to really deliver and impact the society with sustainable solution, and not just another Elon Musk, because the world cannot afford even mask everywhere, but you can really give sustainable solution. This applies to the 3 Rs. If you would like to replace, this applies to animal refinement. This applies to biomedical science in general. In the end, you have to give a solution that is going to the clinics and the people can use it. And also the system can afford it. And that's something that you have to work with economists, you have to work with other people from any other discipline to do that. So a lot of connection, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of different professional profiles that you should mix with. So in the end, you can still be, you can still be in this process, but also you should have some attention that there's other words. And that's how you get to innovation, because then you need more people to collaborate, start questioning your research results, going and be sustainable. So you need help from people to make the impact and maybe changing the world. And paraphrasing probably Annemarie Carusi report from the JRC, maybe what you have to do is break your silos to make a change, not really connected. We have to connect among scientists, but we have to break the silos that we have as a scientist, maybe through Twitter, to get to the other professionals that are in the society, which are lawyers, which are investors. We need to make people understand what we are doing, because that's the only way to get the money. We don't have to expect to have another, Fleming or big word or another COVID to make the people understand that the money for research is important, because money for research should be there, but also the people should be knowledge of what we have done. And so that's what takes you probably from the research to innovation. So just remember that is a cycle from different kind of perspective. So that's, of course, my opinion, but I would like to have more people enjoy and share this vision. And thank you, François, for not passing the votes and the polls, but
you have to ask me, otherwise
sorry, I didn't do
it. You want me to do it now?
Yeah.
We still have some time.
Yeah. While I send it, I have a friend, a toxicologist. He told me, I am the no in innovation. Voilà. So 3 questions, guys. Marco wants to know more about you.
Right now, you're sharing the results. We don't have the questions.
Good. Thank you. I'll do it again.
You are the no in online polls.
No. It was ongoing, because now I just have to share.
Okay.
So, okay, let me start it again. No. Marco, let's start. Yes. First question. Have you been in and out of academia? First question. Have your experience outside academia improve your skill as a scientist? Half of you have voted. Please continue. Yes. Extra effort. You can do it. Okay. So these are your results, Marco, for your first question.
Perfect.
You want to comment them?
Yeah, that's of course what I believe. That there are many people that didn't experiment any experience outside the academia, but I would invite you to do that, because at least you can see 62%, which maybe are not much people. They see that they have improved their skill as scientists. And I feel the same thing. Okay, we have a question from Cecilia.
We can leave questions for the end, if that's okay, Cecilia.
Yeah, I just would like to say it's difficult to answer question 2 if you answer no on question 1.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Fair enough. Yes.
Understood, Marco, for next time. I have another question.
That's a tricky one.
I have another question of Marco, but we can put it on the Q&A, or you wanted to play it now, Marco?
No, it's fine. The Q&A, it's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
So next up is me. So François will have the enormous pleasure of introducing me.
Good. Wait. Yes, I have your bio in front of my eyes. So Nuno has degrees in both biology and science education and a PhD in biomedical science. He's a researcher at the I3S, so University of Porto, on the topics of laboratory animal welfare, animal ethics, and the 3 R's. He is vice president of SPCAL. You will tell us what it is. A board member of Animal Research Tomorrow and president-elect of EdPlus. You can also mention what it is. And Nuno sits on the I3S Animal Welfare Body and coordinates the Portuguese network of animal welfare bodies. Rede Orbea. With my French.
Okay, that was very good for a French guy. That was brilliant, François. Thank you. May I share my screen now?
Yes, you can. And
Okay.
Nuno will talk about leadership.
Oh, yes.
In opinion.
So I hope you're...
And Nuno has no polls.
Hooray. Okay, so thank you for inviting me, François. So one of the, we were mentioning earlier that I have the highest Kardashian index. One of the reasons is because I actually add my Twitter handle on my slides. So you can, I invite you to follow me if you want to. If you do not want to, follow me anyway, because I might retweet someone more interesting than myself. So let me just put this a little bit smaller. So apparently François thinks kindly enough of me to think that I would give a good lecture on leadership. The thing is, why me? I am not a group leader. I come from a peripheral low-income country. Portugal has no 3R center yet. We are building one at the I3S, but so far we do not have a 3R center or 3R's dedicated funding or animal welfare dedicated funding. And there are, as you've seen and you're going to see, there are very successful people in this panel, CEOs, people founding their own companies and research groups. So why me? That was my first thought. But then I thought, well, why not? Indeed, I have been team leader for several research projects. I am president-elect of EdPlus, as François mentioned, the EU education and training platform for laboratory animal science. I have founded and currently lead the Portuguese network of animal welfare bodies. I am vice president of the Portuguese Society for Laboratory Animal Science. I'm a board member of Animal Research Tomorrow. I am on the advisory board for a multi-million-dollar project, European Research Infrastructure. I've organized several courses, workshops, symposia, and I actually received a bloody award. So why not me? But still, yet my first instinct was to second guess myself. So if I, who arguably have been able to accomplish at least some things in my field, the first reaction was, why me? I can imagine young scientists looking around and saying, well, can I be a leader? Well, everyone else seems to be better than me at something. So my invitation would be first to get rid of that imposter syndrome as much as you can. So do not ask yourself if you are the best person for the job, because chances are you probably aren't. I'm sorry to break the news for you, but you are probably not the best person for the job. But this is because there is no such thing as the best person for the job. So is this okay? So rather ask yourself, are you good enough? So either you are or you aren't. If you are good enough, if you feel that you are good enough, then by all means, be proactive. Don't sit around and think, oh, because this happened to me. I wish someone would gather the animal welfare bodies because we have no guidance, no specific training in Portugal. We do not have a tradition of animal welfare officers or animal welfare bodies. The competent authorities not doing anything in this regard. The national committee is doing nothing in this regard. I wish someone would do it. And that lasted for a couple of years until I decided myself to do it along with other colleagues. So if you think you're good enough, find the gaps. What is missing in your community? What is missing the 3 R's? What is missing the 3 R in replacement, reduction and refinement that you think you could address with sufficient work and time and investment? So I call it being actively optimistic. So a passive optimist is someone who will think, oh, things will turn out for the better and wait. Someone who is actively optimistic will say, things will turn out for the better and improve and move forward if I do something about it. Trust yourself then. And you will make mistakes. You will fail, sometimes miserably. It's just a matter of you believing in yourself. Not always easy. Speaking is easy, but rest assured, failure will often teach you more than success. But what if I do not think I'm good enough? Well, you might not be yet, but you will. So find out what you're good at and improve on that. It might be in writing manuscripts, public speaking, graphic design, organizing meetings, public outreach. I was good in a couple of these things. I think I'm decent now on the others because I actually invested on improving these skills. This is something that sometimes people have I'm going to say talent, but there is no talent without work. There is nothing you cannot learn. Okay, so I'm terrible at graphic design. Oh, I taught myself how to design logos for my organizations and others, because no one will do it and it would be too expensive to hire someone, so I did it. And if necessary, get trained in the skills that you find essential to achieve your goals. Seize and also make the opportunities. Because half of the times I got invited for stuff, people did not know whether I was any good, actually. François can attest to that. So at first I got invited because people had heard of me, not necessarily because they knew of my work. So it does not matter why you are given an opportunity. It does not matter. Do not judge, do not second guess yourself. The important thing is that you excel when presented with an opportunity. So how to get people to know you, or at least hear of you. So Twitter is great, do not get me wrong, but nothing beats meeting people at conferences, courses, actually reaching out, expanding your network. Send senior scientists emails congratulating them on their talks. They are suckers for this sort of thing. Ask questions, show genuine interest. Do not do it if you're not actually not interested. Be genuine in what you do. It helps to mention your supervisor, because us, all the scientists probably know them, even if we do not know you, to grow your network. Organize events as an excuse to reach out to more senior people and also junior people that would want to work with you. Organize training courses as well. Do outreach is a really great way of getting visibility, not only within your own institute to your peers, but also to the public. And do be generous with your time and attention, because people tend to really appreciate that. So being invited to do this also begged the question for me of thinking, what does it mean to be a leader? Well, it depends on who you ask. For some, it is to be the best or the best in a given field, to publish papers in fancy journals, getting lots of research funding, to be a group leader, for instance, or to just to be able to boss people around. and people will recognize you as a leader. Well, I'll give you my personal take on what I think a leader is. It means being trusted by your peers, by your colleagues, being involved in your community, not necessarily only your community of peers, but also your extended community, which includes non-academics, to be a reliable colleague, to be seen. So it's not enough to be visible. You actually have to be seen. People need to, being visible is just the first part. After people notice you, they have to see you and think of you in order for you to be a leader. And for that, you have to be at some level generous. So you allow people to know you and know your work and know what you're good at. So you can be heard and be influenced. So being a leader will often mean being first, which definitely beats being the best. If you find a void, if you find a niche, if you find and think of something that needs to be done, if you arrive there first, it will be much better than just working your way to be the best and then then someone else will do it for you. So inspire others to share your vision. That's what being a leader is, because this is what will allow you to making things happen. Being a leader means making things happen. Being it an organization, a course, an event, a research consortium, whatever. You lead when you have the power to influence people and inspire people to do what you think is best to move things forward, the 3 R's included. So I bet you've all saw this trope of the boss in that cart bossing people around, and the leader who actually inspires people to participate and motivates them. The thing is, if you are a young researcher and you are a young leader to be, it looks more like this. There will be time where you will be pushing your cart alone, by yourself. And then, only then, you'll get, if you are inspiring enough, you'll get people to follow you and help you share that burden. And speaking of making things happen and helping the leaders of tomorrow, I have what I think are very exciting news for all of you. So Animal Research Tomorrow is launching very soon. So next week, we are officially launching 3 R's grants and also SciComm grants, but I'll focus on the 3 R's grants for young scientists for developing and testing replacement, reduction, and refinement approaches in animal research. These are relatively small grants, but I can tell you that for a young scientist with little funding, 5,000 euros during 1 year can go a long way. I did like 2 years worth of work with entry-level equipment that I managed to get with a small 2,500 euro grant. So the deadline for submitting proposals will be November 1st, 2021. And by young scientists, we mean people with up to 8 years after their PhDs, or this is also open to non-PhDs below the age of 35. In this way, Animal Research Tomorrow, and this is what I think, for instance, this is an example of what leadership may be, helping others thrive. So with this, I hope you apply, and I hope we manage to be the leaders, to make you the leaders of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. Thank you for all this sharing your own experience, sharing insights around leadership and how to build leadership by yourself. And this surprise for the young scientist listening to us.
Surprise!
Hey, and
I'm so excited
I was trying
with
to
this.
pick you. You did an excellent presentation. I had already seen you doing presentation, so I was not completely crazy.
But the very first time you invited me for anything.
Yes, it's the first time I do session, so consider yourself as a special guest. All right, I think we can continue with the program, Nuno.
Yes, and next up is David Demartin, who with a talk on regulatory science, industry research, and innovation for the testing of substances. David is an INRAE research professor in sociology and political science. He is the director of the Interdisciplinary Laboratory Science Innovation and Society. His research broadly concerns the production and use of scientific knowledge in regulation and public policy, particularly in risk regulation. He is the author of 2 books on the subject, The Science of Bureaucracy and Risk Decision-Making and the US Environmental Protection Agency, and also from MIT Press 2020, and also Scientists and the Regulation of Risk from Edward Elgar Publishing in 2011. As I told you, very impressive people with very impressive CVs, but don't let that demotivate you from considering yourself future leaders. So David, thank you so much, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Nuno, for this kind introduction. It was obviously very kind because I wrote it. So, but thanks anyway for reading it out loud and sharing the fact, yes, with the audience here that yes, I'm in a way part of your community, but I'm a social scientist. So I'm perhaps speaking from a slightly different perspective here. But basically, after learning about Twitter and data management and innovation and leadership, but also graphic design. I mean, all of this universe in which you may sort of invest as a scientist. Now I'd like to talk to you about regulatory science, also a sort of parallel universe from research in which you may or may not be involved. And basically, I'd like to engage with you on that issue and provoke thoughts, and also at the end of the presentation get your feelings and your opinions about whether it's a good idea or not to do sort of regulatory science and get involved in this sort of world. So let me share my screen, and I hope you see it from this point. So yeah, that's the whole point of the talk, engaging with regulatory science. And I mean, basically the story here is whether regulatory science is or not becoming a sort of more fancy area, and an area of blooming interest for researchers, and why would it be so? And again, I'd like to hear you or get your opinions through the poll about this. There are many possible definitions of regulatory science out there, but just, I mean, a quick working definition. It's broadly the science that some people, companies, laboratories, whether public or private, produce in the course of assessing the risks and the benefits of many different kinds of technologies and products that undergo regulation, from industrial chemicals to pharmaceuticals, medical devices, cosmetics, biotechnologies of all kinds, and so on. I mean, the list is quite long, and it's a well-defined and perhaps even more and more specifically defined universe of methods, and you obviously get a lot of now training, curricula, textbooks in regulatory science that have properly delimited what it is about, and basically listing all of these and providing methods and guidance in how to analyze chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, how to do a proper, replicable, accessible toxicity tests, animal tests generally of acute, subacute, subchronic, chronic toxicity. Obviously, when one speaks of pharmaceutical products, clinical trial is one of the main area of practice of regulatory science, and one could also mention post-marketing, post-launch studies, and there are many more methods in this universe. But basically, it's sort of a well-defined list of methods and scientific practices that are used in the process of evaluating these substances. So perhaps one of the key things about regulatory science, about this kind of science in this scientific universe, is that it is perhaps more than other universe of science and what we call research and fundamental research or blue sky research, is that it's a little more standard and it's obviously in part prescribed and mandated. So that means that a lot of if you talk, as I do, if you interview scientists in research laboratories and in universities in biology research, toxicology, biomedical research, the kind of sentiments that you would get is regulatory science. This is really about box ticking, really just checking on received criteria of toxicity, and I mean, obviously not a very exciting area to invest in. This isn't research. There's research on the one hand, and there's regulatory science on the other. Not for me. I would not go there. You would get this kind of quote too: people aren't winning Nobel Prizes in it, so why, what the heck, really not the sort of stimulating, exciting kind of scientific endeavors that you want to embark on. So little publishing interest, what kind of really, I mean, you wouldn't get a piece about regulatory science or regulatory study, a result from a regulatory study in Nature or Science, right? So little publishing interest. All of that are kind of motives for separating research from regulatory science and marking the boundary between the two and basically describing regulatory science as a sort of no-go area. So I do sociology, I describe scientific communities and ecosystems. So in a sense, that would be the regulatory science ecosystem. You have standard setting bodies in one circle here that define the guidelines, the standards, how to test things. You have a whole test industry that provides the materials, even the rats, the cages, the software to do those studies. And you have obviously the companies who actually do the studies, and many more and more frequently specialized consultancies doing it. And all of that goes to regulatory agencies who consider those studies, discuss those studies. And academics there, you want they basically feed this ecosystem. They might get involved in the standard setting area, contributing to the work of the OECD, for instance. They might actually collaborate with the chemical industry, with pharmaceutical industry, or even with consultancies at times. They may also sit in the expert committees of regulatory agencies to assist in the evaluation of product. So, but the point is, there are not an awful lot of academics, or you might, we can suspect that only a very small portion of university-based researchers actually follow those trajectories and feed the whole ecosystem. So, on the contrary, social science, political science, the kind of sociology we do, or the so-called field of science and technology studies, has shown that this ecosystem is very much fed and, well, perhaps controlled by the concerned industries, the impacted industries, who actually go to regulatory agencies and lobby regulatory agencies. They would actually hire academics to do research really on purpose to defend their products. They're very, very present in standard setting forum to basically shape the kind of test guidelines and so on and so forth, obviously to make sure that the kind of tests that they are submitted to at the end of the day don't produce the kind of results that they are more comfortable with. So obviously regulatory science has this strong industry presence, if not sort of captured, possibly we could describe it as captured by the chemical industry, and that obviously, or other industries, and that obviously perhaps contributes to the lessening the interest of people who are not from the industry in getting involved in regulatory science. That involvement of the industry means that regulatory agencies have been accused very much of being under too much influence of the regulated industries. So just here quick images talking about some issues, if not scandals, with the European Food Safety Authority, describing it as indeed, captured or using scientists that are too close to industry and therefore lacking the independence to actually question or critically review the kind of data and studies that the industries produce in this world of regulatory science. If you do some scientometrics, rip the publications in this world of in that particular image concerns the area of biotechnology regulation, biotech risk assessment. What you see also is that regulatory science tends to be controlled by what I've called invisible colleges, because since not an awful lot of academics come to feed the ecosystem, basically some small core sets of people or colleges manage to take really high importance in that area, and I've chosen to call that invisible colleges. And you can actually, there are facts, measurable facts behind that. So I mean, so much for the sort of negative views about about regulatory science. The shift is. The shift is that one may feel that regulatory science still is an interesting area, an area of blooming interest. One, there are signs of interest from academics and multiple other actors who want to do more regulatory science, and I'll just list a few examples here, and then again go to the poll and see how you stand on these questions. But basically, 2013, Nature, a long paper, a long survey from a journalist about regulatory science, in particular as concerned the testing of pharmaceuticals and medical devices, where you find this quote from a scientist calling regulatory science the field of the future, really an area of exciting development and really a go-to area for academics who would have thought that this would never be for them, really. And why that? I mean, first, there is some while we used to describe regulatory science as something really separate from research and disconnected in a way from research, on the other hand, one might consider that there is some overlap between regulatory toxicology and the most perhaps sort of quickly developing and exciting area of toxicology, if you want to call it that way, being mechanistic toxicology. And if you actually look at the sort of debates in risk assessment, which I'm doing currently with colleagues, diving into the documents and the debates between experts inside regulatory agencies about biotechs, chemicals, and see how they assess products. Basically, they spend a lot of time discussing mechanisms and the so-called toxicity pathways and so on and so forth. And asking themselves what really is the mechanism and how can we learn more about these mechanisms and whether they are relevant for the product that is under review, and so on and so forth. So that means that mechanistic toxicology, which is the kind of broad paradigm under which sort of academics work, is one way through which research can be made relevant and reach and be used in the sort of regulatory science world. One illustration of this is the sort of through, well, just one example, the adverse outcome pathway kind of wiki, where you see a lot of conversations being tied between regulatory people and academics. Another reason why there might be a good, there might be reasons to think that regulatory science reconnects with research is that some academics and people who develop new methods and alternative methods, obviously, in their area of research are making the effort to actually, well, validate, standardize a little bit more these methods so that they become available and can be used in testing strategies. And you see regulatory agencies being progressively more open to these methods and these kind of data. It's obviously a very slow process, but there's, something happening there. Regulatory science is becoming an interesting sign of blooming interest in regulatory science is the creation of more regulatory science centers in top universities around in Europe and in North America. There are a few examples here, and the so-called centers of excellence in regulatory science, who are basically funded by the Food and Drug Administration, the US Food and Drug Administration, that realized some 10 years ago that, well, basically there was so much research that they could tap into and use for in regulatory science processes and risk assessment processes that they needed to invest there. And so there are public funds that are available now to do research in regulatory science. And finally, I would mention that regulatory science or studies relating to the risks of high-profile products and high-profile issues and substances, controversial substances, is also a way to sort of not do regulatory science, but produce research that is relevant for risk assessment and regulatory science and for regulatory agency. And I would just mention two examples here, research from academics specialized in genotoxicity who reviewed the studies that are used to assess the safety of glyphosate, and they had an impact on regulatory agencies. Another example is this GMO 90+ study, which was conducted by a consortium in France. And this group of academics conducted some animal studies and quite innovative metabolomic and proteomic research on food biotech to help the French Environment Agency decide whether GMOs should be authorized and should be considered safe or not. So again, an example of possible engagement with, if not regulatory science, at least the regulatory world, and in which people with innovative methods and new research have managed to have impact and so get closer to this world of regulatory science. So here we are, sort of presented you two sort of broad images of regulatory science. I don't have any particular advice as my co-presenters sort of had, because well, I don't feel too well placed to give you any advice of this sort, but I'm curious. I mean, after hearing this, what your own position and feeling would be. So here's the poll I suggest running, François, and try to well, you took another my previous formulation of my questions, but that's all right. Let's go for this one.
Yes, sorry about that. Less choices. And half of the people voted.
I want. Okay, so you have one person less.
So you're an outlier or bias, and I'll close the vote. And here are the results, David.
Ah,
So
all right.
Still
Interesting.
Everyone, but at least you have at least convinced me. Definitely, I think it's very encouraging to hear that it's the research is reconnecting with the regulatory science, with the AOPs and the mechanistic toxicology. All these key messages about the invisible college, the regulatory capture are also a reality we are normally not, I would say, conscious about. So that was particularly
wake up call from a colleague in social science, from the neighboring disciplines, if you like.
Thank you.
Thanks for your attention.
Nuno?
Oh, I was muted. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, David. So, last but definitely not least speaker who I have the enormous pleasure of introducing is Annemarie Lang. Annemarie will talk about gender inequality in science, and she will help us find the end of the rainbow. Annemarie is a doctor who studied veterinary medicine and then dedicated her postgraduate life to science. Really sounds like a worthwhile mission. Currently, she is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Pennsylvania and the Charité in Berlin. Her research focuses on both in vitro models for musculoskeletal disorders and the active implementation of the 3Rs principle. Thank you for being here, Annemarie. I'm sure we will all enjoy it. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Nuno, for this really nice introduction, and it's my great pleasure to be, to give you a short presentation on a super important topic, gender inequality in science and finding the end of the rainbow. Only as a short disclaimer, everything presented or said is definitely my own opinion and not representable for my affiliations. And in order to open this important topic, I want to share a really short personal story, which is that once upon a while, a colleague told me that everyone knows when I'm serious about something and want to start a meeting, I put on my red lipstick. And as you can see, I'm currently really serious, and this is damn right. And I think I'm also proud of being a woman in science, but we have a problem. And I think this is definitely something we need to talk about within the next minutes. My aim during this talk is to inspire you, to give you some ideas. What are the challenges for women in science? And more look into the problem and trying to understand the reasons why it's hard. And I will definitely focus on women in science, but I will also come across the rainbow at the end, because a lot of these challenges we face or we see that women have in science is also comparable to other minorities within science. And I would like to speak about this at the end. And my general goal is really to create some kind of awareness for this challenge and topic, rather than coming up with solutions, because it's at the moment just not possible to come up with the perfect solutions, I think. So this is why I would like to start with a short Zoom survey. So François, could you please start my survey?
Of course.
So question 1 will be, I want you to think about the own institute, work environment, lab you're working in. First of all, please think about what is the percentage of women doing a PhD at your institute, university, or in your lab? And if you are working in industry, just think about the, I would say, beginner levels or starter levels in your company. And then for the next question, I would like you to think about, okay, what is the percentage of women as professor or even higher positions within the company you are, for example, working, or authority, for example.
All right, we have half of the people voting. Normally we have a stable 70% all over the session. I miss, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Oh, even more, 17, 77%, sorry. And that's it. That's the results. Annemarie.
Okay, and I think this is really great representable for what we are also seeing in current published data. So as you can see, more than 50% of PhD students, or I would say in the beginner starter level, are women. This is also your experience. And then when you look at the higher levels, this number definitively declines. So, and here on this slide, I would like to share with you some data that we gathered in Germany, which was published in a report from last year, where they looked into the development of young scientists throughout their career. So as you can see here, you have the different steps in the career, from university graduates, doctoral candidates, over junior professorship, which is comparable to an assistant professor, and then finally the really high VW3 professorship. And as you can see, or imagine, the red line represents the woman, and the percentage is strikingly declining all over this career developmental path, finally ending with only 27% of women. Another really nice example for this kind of problem is when you look into the ESC grants. So ESC grants, you might know that there are different kind of levels. You have the starter grant, the consolidator grant, and then you have the advanced track. And advanced track is you are the expert in your field, and you are almost, yeah, you're shortly before getting a Nobel Prize, I would say. So you have to have a lot of experience, really high publication, best only in Nature, and then you can maybe get an advanced track ESC grant. So when you look at the submissions and also grants awarded over the last year, I here took exemplarily the life science section out. You can see the different subsections here. And in magenta, you can see the number of grants that were awarded to women. In total, 23% grants were awarded to women. But when you look at how many were submitted by women, it's a really nice funding quote. But what was more shocking for me was the number of women, or the percentage of grants which were submitted by women. It were only 22%. And my question is, where do all the women go? And when do women lose their confidence and even competitiveness throughout the whole process, and not being able at the end to submit an advanced track ESC grant anymore? So this is also nicely highlighted by another study, where we can see this gap between productivity and also career length, because in order to come into the position to apply for an advanced track ESC grant, you need to have a certain kind of years of career. You can't drop out before, and you need a high productivity in publication, but also funding acquisition. On the left side of this graph, you can see the different areas, and I marked it for you in somehow gray, the area which means that it's almost in favor of the male than the female. So as you can see, in all fields, we have the problem in terms of total productivity and also career length, which is always in favor for the man rather than the woman. And when you want to learn something more about the geographical distribution, because the first data I showed you was focusing on Germany, then it was a little bit more representative for Europe. And these are the different countries here. And I marked it again in gray, where you have the area that it's more in favor for the men than the woman. And you see, for example, here marked Germany, really nicely deep into the minus percentage area, but also the UK, for example, and all other European countries, I would say. So my question now is, what do you think? So what do you think are the reasons that could potentially explain the gender inequality seen in higher academic positions? And therefore, I would like to test if we can do a Slido word cloud. So please scan with your phone the QR code. It should directly bring you to a Slido link where you can just put in keywords. And if it's working, then we should see it on the screen coming up here. You also have it on the left side again, the QR code.
And we can also go with the website, right? Slido.com and put the hashtag.
Yeah, or you can put in the hashtag. So the first thing is up, maybe a question of time. Then family, parenthood, gender stereotypes, lack of confidence, traditional views, tradition, yeah, childbirth, childcare, hiring committees, this is interesting, ambition, it's a man's world. It's also, yeah, this looks really good. And I think, yeah, the most of the hits are coming definitively for family and gender stereotypes and parenthood. So now there is one more mode. So I think we can stop here at this, because actually my next slide will definitively focus on family, because also I do not yet have a family. I also know from colleagues and also other early career scientists that especially the family planning or even parenthood is one of the major challenges for women in science. And when we look at the left side here, I think this image really nicely shows what is the difference. So on the upper area, you can see a man or even a woman without children, when they go throughout the academic career path, you can see that it's a straightforward way until the end. You have publication, you have awards, more publication, you get the grants based on the awards, so it's really straightforward. And when you compare it to a woman with children or planning to have children, especially in an earlier, you see that it's getting really complicated. A lot of women then rather go into industry or maybe even teacher jobs or something like this, where you have more job security and not that high pressure. And also when you compare the output throughout the career, it's definitively less than someone without children. And this is a big challenge and definitely a gap where we need to support. So we have to talk about job security in science. It's always asked for flexibility, mobility, going abroad, doing a fellowship. This is sometimes just not possible if you have children and your partner also wants to work. We have the issue with childcare, which is normally sometimes not really sufficient or even not offered by the employer. We need to talk about flexible working hours and also the possibility to work from home, as well as support and maybe also replacement or an assistant during maternity leave in order to somehow bridge the gap of a certain kind of productivity gap that might come up. And we also need to consider that there needs to be final coverage in between grants, because due to maternity leave, you can have delays in finalizing grants, publications. So we need to think really about how can we bridge these gaps. In addition to this, there's definitely this huge problem when it comes to citation bias. I'm not quite sure if you had the opportunity last year to follow up on this kind of really critical paper which was published in Nature Communication on the association between early career, informal mentorship in academic collaborations and junior author performance. It was already retracted because it was a huge criticism coming up from the community, because what the paper claimed, based on really flawed experimental design, was that it's not useful that females mentor young females. It should be rather mixed. And I think this message is just following up on traditional stereotypes, and it's just based on these old data that we have due to these gentlemen clubs and the missing women clubs. So because as women, it's sometimes hard to really find a good network where we can support each other. So finally, before I end this talk, I would also like to highlight the challenges that also LGBT people have within science. Maybe you can think for yourself about how many of your colleagues do you know are officially somehow ranked as LGBT or rank themselves in this area. I think this is normally something that we totally oversee in science, because we normally think, yeah, everyone is open, everyone is tolerant. But I think this kind of survey here that I'm showing you shows that there is a lot of issues also in this kind of group. So when you, for example, look here, they ask people from LGBT community if they are very uncomfortable at work, uncomfortable or neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. And as you can see, especially for non-binary, cisgender or even transgender, there is a high percentage of persons who are feeling not comfortable in their working environment. And I think this should definitively create awareness that when you have a group, or when you are going to have a group, that you need to consider that there might be minorities or subgroups within your group that have special needs that should be addressed. So, and with this, I would like to end this talk with some take-home messages. So I also brought it here. Again, this nice survey. So please be aware of the subgroups and their special needs in your group or work environment. Next of all, definitively think about a family-friendly work environment. It's super essential, and support women in all career stages, not at shortly before the professorship, directly start at the bachelor or master level. And we as women, we need to start to join forces, to form our own women clubs in order to get us into the high journals and promote each other in order to kind of solve this problem and challenges. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Annemarie. I put the light because it's getting late in Brussels, or everywhere, but at least dark here, to make this topic visible, which is normally not covered in our scientific venues, and to put the lipstick so that you took it serious, as you said. We're arriving slowly at the end. I don't know if there is, and this is one of the good things with the Zoom, you can speak up, you don't have always to write in the chat, but whatever you like, feel free to send to us your questions. We are here for that. We already had Nicoletta sharing in the tweet, I'm a tweet fan, in the chat, competition on data management. So it talks also to some of you, and we had also some comment from Ivo, maybe for you, Annemarie. Should males not have the same rights so that they can take care of the kids and that females can continue their careers?
Yeah, so maybe I can, I will start to try to answer this question. So I definitively think it's the same for males who want to go, for example, for maternity leave, etc., in order to support their partners, that they need to have the same rights. Unfortunately, it's not that often, or it's not comparably often that men drop out of science or out of the academic path because they want to have a family and somehow serve their family rather than going up the academic path. It's more that young women decide to not go into the academic career because it's so hard to somehow combine it with family. And I think this is the issue. We have to really go to the roots where it starts and not just to the end. But yeah, it is also, it goes in both gender directions, I would say.
Is it also that we consider that the job is so demanding with the PhD, the postdoc, etc., that you have no time for anything else? And then no one thinks, okay, either you have a supportive partner, but you can't combine both at the same time. I know exceptions. I know people who did PhDs and are raising kids at the same time. So it's not impossible, but maybe
yeah, I think it's definitely possible. It always depends on the situation also for your partner and the I think also the country that you are living in. We had this discussion yesterday in a workshop. So for example, in the US, where you normally also have only little support with childcare or only really short maternity leave, etc., etc., I know colleagues who went to the US, got their children, and they have partners which didn't work during this time in order to care for the kids. Why this is totally different, for example, in Germany, where you have more support, or even when we think about the Nordic countries. So I think in Sweden, Norway, I think that it's a totally different when it comes to to childcare support and women in science. So
thank you, Annemarie. Well,
Okay.
well.
I actually have a number of questions. If I'm allowed to, if you have questions, raise your hand or put them in the chat. Do we still have time for a few?
Anyway, it's late. Anyway, it's late. So
yes, it's because we started a bit late.
No worry. I mean, I'm happy to have this conversation at this session. So go ahead. Huh?
Okay, I was curious about that Chinese university that was considering using Twitter posts in evaluating researchers, and I wanted really to know your opinion on that. Should we? Is it relevant?
I mean, it's, if you took it as one metric, then like any metric, what makes it a better one than the others? You know, anyone can tweet. Yeah. You can also buy ghost followers. So I think the bottom line is the science communication, how you do it, with which medium is maybe a question of taste. I think they were pushing the people to be more visible, being in the Twitter sphere. Maybe people that were reluctant to engage. I would make more a bundle of these social media metrics, like Altmetric is doing or whatever, to have an idea, but not just one. Why not? Why not? But it's, as soon as you put a focus on one, then you may overweight, give bias.
And then the metric becomes the objective.
Exactly.
and
then you lose the purpose of doing it for the sake of engaging with the stakeholders, knowing your community, discussing with others, crafting your key message, etc., etc.
Yes. Do we have time for just one very, very, very quick one?
Sure.
Okay, mine is for Nynke, because I always struggle about this, because my data is either a few kilobytes worth or several gigabytes. So depending on whether I should include my videos or not. So, so whether if I only have like the result of the analysis and put it on a spreadsheet, then it's fine. But then people will have to trust that I actually have the videos and I did the work and I did it properly. But if I upload hundreds of videos, sometimes how can I even start to even ask my institution to offer the hosting space for that.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point that a lot of us run into, particularly if you do things like microscopy or similar. No, but officially, so the way we buy and within the proposal that we write, we buy space, so sort of Sarah and some of the storage space like that, and we indicate how long we keep them. So say like we're going to do this for 5 years after publication, for example, or so that that's part of the plan to say whether we keep them or not. Yeah. But yeah, and with the advent of these new technologies, this is definitely an issue. But there are warehouses that you would buy into for space.
Warehouse.
Yeah.
Okay, we have just a comment that Marco actually wanted to add the mental health issues that many researchers experiment to the hard work. Definitely, that would be a whole session in and of itself. François, would you be so kind as to close the session?
Sure. Well, first of all, a big thank you for all the speakers, because you talked about things I really like to hear about. And thank you for accepting to come and share your enthusiasm on this. But I hope that we give to the audience also a different view, or at least a tip of the iceberg of what exists beyond the knowledge productions that we are focused on always during this these events, looking at the knowledge dissemination, but forgetting about the context and the ecosystem where we live. We have listed a few topics. There was a regulatory science, there was innovation, there was leadership, data management, gender equality, inequality. But we could have talked about much more, maybe the
mental health.
Mental health, and thank you for this, Marco. It's maybe another topic for another session. I'm very keen on organizing another session like that and go further and explore together of a topic. We could have discussed the scientometrics. What is good science? How do you measure it? And
let me take notes.
Yes, we have, but there would be also the peer review system. We could have discussed about open science, how the journals are working and they are maybe evolving. We could have discussed also about the predatory journals. These are many different topics that could have been covered. You see, we are not short of ideas. The conflict of interest, misconduct, harassment at work. I think UWC11 has covered a few also in some of parallel session, but it's clearly worth mentioning all those things during the Congress. Thank you for the people who managed to stay with us until the last minute. Thanks a lot. Big applause, and I will use the reaction button to all of you guys.
Thank you so much.
And I wish you a good end of the Congress. And with this, I'll close.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you very, very much, François.
Thank
Thank you to all the
you.
And Nuno
speakers.
for joining us and
Yeah.
everybody else.
Very nice to meet you all.
Very
Really
helpful.
nice. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.